Denny Hamlin says it's to be determined if 2411 will show up at the Clash in the Daytona 500, and FedEx will not be back with Joe Gibbs Racing and will likely be leaving NASCAR altogether. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got some NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. We're going to start talking about Grayson Stucker. As it was announced earlier today that Grayson Stucker is officially retiring from Goodyear. Grayson Stucker has been with Goodyear for 42 years and has been with them for a very long time. I remember seeing him basically when Tony Stewart was criticizing Goodyear all the way back in 2009, and I've seen him be in the forefront of Goodyear for many, many years. He's been in the sport for a very, very long time, for over 20 years at this point. He's been a long-term executive for the Goodyear brand. It's sad to see him go. It's a really unfortunate to see he won't be back anytime soon. Congratulations, Greg, on a fantastic and incredible career, and it's really sad to see him unfortunately retiring after a really solid career in the sport. Good luck to whatever endeavors he does going forward as he unfortunately ends up retiring. And now we're going to head jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're unfortunately taking this episode to a sour note. As tragically was sadly announced on Saturday evening before the NASCAR Xfinity Series race took place that Bobby Allison has sadly passed away at the age of 86 years old. Bobby Allison was one of the greatest NASCAR drivers of all time, one of the 10 best in my opinion. He won the Daytona 500 3 times, won the Cup Series championship in 1983, one of the oldest champions in Cup Series history, and was always good up until the end of his career. He had the grit, he had determination, and knew always how to perform at the best, and was able to be a championship contender year in and year out. My thoughts and condolences do go out to the Allison family during this tragic time. We're thinking about them at this moment. Bobby had an amazing career in the sport. It was great to see NASCAR give him a gesture by giving him that Bowman Gray Stadium when he went from 84 to 85 wins. So it's a well-deserved win there. We're thinking about the Allison family during this time. Just a tragic loss for the sport and tragedy for motorsports. Thinking about the Allison family during this time. And now we're going ahead jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about the pace car during the Cup race at Phoenix. Now, if you watched the NASCAR Cup Series Championship race at Phoenix, you probably saw the pace car incident that took place. So coming to the restart of stage number 2, you had Chase Elliott and Christopher on the front row. But all of a sudden, the cameras pan away, and the pace car is like slowing down partly halfway through pit road. All of a sudden, you pan across and you see the barrels of sand that are basically destroyed. Everyone's like looking like, what in the world just happened? Well, all of a sudden, we get a replay, and the pace car driver nearly missed pit road, turned left, hits the sand barrels, and damages the front of the car, and ends up spinning out. They have to go to red flag to clean up the sand barrels and clean up the mess they ended up making. I have seen a lot of things in my time as a fan of this sport. That is one of the wildest and craziest things I have probably ever seen as a fan. Maybe one of the scariest things ever too, because it could have been more dangerous if things had been worse. Thank God nobody got hurt in that, and thank God they were able to get everything figured out, because that was just a bonehead move as well. Whoever's driving it needs to do a much better job. That's probably going to be the What an Idiot award for when they do it on Door Bumper Clear later today, because that podcast is coming out later today. It was just wild seeing that. It was really, really funny overall, but wild to see the pace car get spun out at Phoenix. Really wild stuff. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Stewart-Haas Racing. Now, before the NASCAR Cup Series race took place at Phoenix Raceway, you saw a really nice message that was put out by Stewart-Haas Racing. They were able to thank the fans for all the support that they have shown over the years, and I thank everybody for everything. Stewart-Haas Racing is officially closed after being in the NASCAR Cup Series for many years, from 2009 through 2024. You think about the success of this organization. Won 2 NASCAR Cup Series championships in 2011 and 2014, one for Tony Stewart and one for Kevin Harvick. And up until the end of their tenure, when they got to the next gen era, they were solid and very competitive team. Drivers like Kurt Busch, Kevin Harvick, Harvick, Clint Boyer, Tony Stewart, Eric Almirola, you name it, and even Chase Briscoe all got chances and opportunities, and they were able to win in Stewart-Haas Racing equipment. It's sad to see Stewart-Haas Racing officially gone and no longer being in the sport. They got to see at least Riley Herbst go to victory lane. We'll talk about him shortly in just a little bit. Both Tony and Gene were at the track at Phoenix, so it's good to see him actually showing up to the racetrack for once, but I think it's sad to see them going away. But at the same token, same time, they left a really big impact for many years, but it sucks to see them unfortunately leaving the sport, and everything they did was pretty solid. Sad to see them unfortunately going away. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Jimmie Johnson. Now, after the NASCAR Cup Series race concluded at Phoenix Raceway, Jimmie Johnson was talking to Daniel Hemrick, and I think they did a driver or basically a helmet swap. Now, Jimmie Johnson also during the interviews confirmed that he will be back in select NASCAR Cup Series races in 2025 with the number of races to be determined. Now, Jimmie Johnson obviously ran 9 Cup Series races in 2025 and 24. We don't know at this time how many he's going to run. I would think the Daytona 500 is definitely going to be one race he will run. He probably will run the Brickyard 400 once again next year. I'd have to think the Coke 600 is definitely on the table for next year. And I have to think maybe the Chicago Street Course say was going to run 2 years ago. I'd have to think that's also a potential possibility as well. I want to see Jimmie be successful. He actually had a decent run today at Phoenix, which was really, really good to see, but he also did struggle a little bit as well. I hope Jimmie can have a really, really strong run, though, next year and get Legacy Motor Club up to shape, because Legacy Motor Club, they have struggled this year, and they just were never competitive, unfortunately, throughout the year. So I really hope they can step up and get a lot better. That should be the main focus for the team, but I'm also glad to see that Jimmie will be coming back for a few races next year. I think he'll run around 4 to 5 races, but probably less than he did in 2024. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Martin Truex Jr. Before Martin Truex Jr. stepped in behind the wheel for his final full-time Cup Series start, he actually spoke to the media this past week. And he's basically spoke on the end of his career in the NASCAR Cup Series, wanted to reflect, and he hopes that he was able to leave an impact for his fans and the drivers in the sport. Now, he was given a standing ovation basically in the media center during driver intros. He didn't stand up himself, but he sat down, and every driver in the Cup Series, like Chase Elliott, Kyle Larson, I saw Chris Rebel standing up, Austin Cindric, Noah Grayson, Kyle Busch, I think, was there as well. Everybody was pretty much standing up and congratulating Martin Truex Jr. on a fantastic and amazing career. Martin is one of the cleanest and best racers in NASCAR history, and I think his impact in this sport has been absolutely incredible. It is sad to see that he's retiring from full-time racing officially. He will be back, of course, part-time next year with 23XI, even though their future is a little bit in question at this point. But I do believe that absolutely he left a big impact on the sport for many, many years, and proved that you didn't have to race somebody hard and wreck them to win races. You can race very fair, but very clean and gain respect from your competitors. Congratulations to Martin Truex Jr. on a fantastic and great career. We're going to miss you on the track, dude. Thank you for everything. Chase Briscoe's going in that car next year. Hopefully he can do a really good job. I think Martin Doe has done a lot of great things for the sport. And like Elton Sawyer said, something I'll agree for him for once, he is a first ballot Hall of Famer. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Busch. Now, earlier tonight on social media, Derek Nean put out a tweet indicating that it looks like he will be retiring from spotting at the end of this year and might have just did his final spotting in NASCAR altogether. And Brian Nolan has also reported from Front Stretch that Kyle Busch will have a new spotter for 2025. Now, we do not know who the spotter is currently at the moment, but this is definitely really shocking. I think Kyle Busch and Derek Nean had really gelled very well together throughout this year and last year as well. He guided Kyle Busch to picking up 3 wins in 2023. But not only that, I think he worked with Kyle Larson for many years, worked with Tyler Reddick, worked with some really good drivers in Xfinity, and he's done some really good things in the sport for a very, very long time. He did some truck series work as well. I think he worked with Spire Motorsports recently, and it's kind of wild to see that he's not going to be working in NASCAR going forward, unfortunately, or might just be moving to a different organization. The question is, who is Kyle Busch going to work with? There's some spotters, some SHR that are definitely available. I know that they're hiring a bunch of people over at RCR currently at the moment, so I'd have to think maybe some spotters could be a potential possibility for next year as well. To me, I really hope they can find a great spotter for Kyle Busch because I think Kyle Busch has earned the right to get a good spotter. I know this year was a little bit of frustration for Kyle. He didn't win for the first time in a season, so hopefully they can figure it out for him. But I do think there's a good spotter on the way. Hopefully we'll figure out who that spotter is for 2025 very soon. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Rick Allen. Now, if you're on social media yesterday or over the course of the last couple of days, you probably saw a really touching post from Rick Allen. He had a really touching post thanking his family for all the support over the years. And if you've been on social media across many of the media reporters that work at NBC, you saw Dale Earnhardt Jr., who no longer works at NBC, congratulating Rick on a really incredible career. And I believe even saw a post from Steve Letarte indicating that this may be it for Rick Allen. Now, Rick Allen, of course, has been rumored for potentially be going to some different networks, but a lot of rumors are starting to circulate that this could truly be it for Rick Allen commentating in NASCAR altogether, whether that's in the Cup Series, the Xfinity Series, or the Truck Series. If this truly is it for Rick Allen in NASCAR, it's going to be a really big shame. Rick Allen, in my opinion, is someone who is very underrated. I know when he started on NBC, he was not that great, but over time, he became polished, he became a lot better, and started excelling at his craft. He was really great in the Craftsman Truck Series, really carried those Craftsman Truck Series boots for many, many years. And I think that Rick Allen has kept himself professional, has done overall a fantastic and great job. And I have a ton of respect for Rick Allen and everything that he's been able to accomplish as a lead commentator for many, many years. If this truly is the end for Rick Allen, which I hope it isn't the end, it'll be sad to see him go. He's done a lot of great things for motorsports as a whole, covered motorsports for nearly 20 years in NASCAR, been involved with NBC, been involved with Fox. I would love to see him do some commentary in 2025. And Rick really isn't that old, right? He's only, I believe, like 50 or 51 years old. So he's a relatively young commentator, too, going into retirement. But this truly is it for Rick Allen. Rick, we're going to miss you. Thank you for everything you've done for NASCAR and everything you've done for motorsports. And thank you for all you've been able to accomplish as a lead commentator. You're one of the best to ever do it covering this sport. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Chase Purdy. Now, earlier today, Chase Purdy put out a tweet thanking everybody for the support throughout 2024 and basically kind of indicated, and it's pretty much confirmed at this point, that Chase Purdy will not be returning to Spire Motorsports in the Craftsman Truck Series in 2025. Now, we've kind of already talked about this on the channel this week. There's been a lot of speculation around Spire Motorsports NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series program, and it seems like Chase Purdy is not going to be part of that program. Now, what does this mean for Chase Purdy? What this means, he will be a free agent going into 2025. I'm going to be real and honest about Chase Purdy. I think he does have some talent, but he was getting outperformed by Raja Karuf in most weeks, and he got outperformed by Nick Sanchez, and that 7 truck was outperforming Chase Purdy, though he did get a top 5 at Martinsville very, very recently. He has generally struggled throughout the 2024 campaign and never really has been able to excel. He got a pole earlier this year at Kansas, which was really, really huge, but he really never had a lot of those really great and fantastic runs throughout 2024. So now the big question is, where does Chase Purdy end up in 2025? I'm going to be real and honest, maybe McAnally Hilgeman Racing, that could certainly be an option for next year. I'd have to think that's a really big possibility. There's a couple Truck Series rides that are open for next year at this point. Maybe moves up to Xfinity. That could certainly be a possibility. There are a few truck rides out there, some decent truck rides that are not announced. Nice has 1 or 2 that are available, but I have to think it's going to be part of the Chevy camp if he's going to be in trucks, considering he's been working with Chevy for many, many years. I really hope Chase can find a ride for next year, but again, it sounds very unlikely at this particular moment that Chase Purdy is going to be racing in trucks, which again is very disappointing and unfortunate if it ends up being true. But at the same time, it would not be surprising considering the fact that while he does have fun, he has struggled quite a bit. We'll see where he ends up going and ends up racing, but as of right now, it seems like his future is a little bit in question. We'll see if he ends up finding a ride for 2025. And now we're going ahead to on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Anthony Alfredo versus Stephen Parsons. Now, if you watch the NASCAR Xfinity Series race on Saturday, you saw the intentional or maybe intentional wreck for Anthony Alfredo going up against Stephen Parsons. Now, about halfway through the NASCAR Xfinity Series race on lap 75 or lap 76 of the event, Stephen Parsons and Anthony Alfredo were battling inside of the top 20, both having really strong and really good runs. Going down the front straightaway, Stephen made a little bit of a misjudgment and made a mistake and got into Anthony Alfredo going down the front straightaway. And Anthony, I believe, got into the outside wall. Going down the front straightaway, meanwhile, Anthony seemed to be very frustrated and upset, and it looked like he might have intentionally ran into Stephen and might have intentionally spun him out. This would send Stephen really hard into the outside wall. Then Stephen, after that incident happened, was not very happy, justifiably so, and Anthony would incur a penalty for 2 laps. Now, Anthony then fell out of the race due to a flat tire and also did confirm he will not be back at Our Motorsports. He did say it was not intentional what he was doing, but he did feel like the NASCAR had to do what he had to do and wasn't really mad about the penalty considering he shouldn't have done what he done on the track. I don't care if it was intentional or not. If you ride with somebody down the straightaway in an event, regardless of how good of a driver you are, that is just uncalled for. Now, unlike Connor Jones 2 weeks ago, Anthony gets the benefit of the doubt because I do think Anthony has been a driver that's been generally pretty clean this year at times. Yes, he's been aggressive on the track, but he's not a driver that I've seen and known historically that has a really bad reputation. So I do think that NASCAR handled it really well there. Now, will NASCAR maybe penalize him for Daytona? That could certainly be a possibility, but I don't know if that is going to be the case. Of course, he's got to figure out if he's going to have a ride next year at this point with his future being in question right now. But I do think that if you're Anthony Alfredo, you basically got off with a 2-lap penalty, which I think, again, was a very fair penalty. But if he keeps doing stuff like this next year, if he does race next year, he is going to have to clean it up because you can't do this stuff on the racetrack. It's uncalled for. It's unacceptable. Stephen had every right to be frustrated and upset. There was no reason to do that. That was a really bad move on Anthony Alfredo's part. I understand being mad at frustration in those situations, but I think that was totally uncalled for and unacceptable in my honest opinion. I think absolutely the justified call by NASCAR. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Busch once again. Now, Kyle Busch spoke to the media on multiple different things, including speaking about his final NASCAR Cup Series start or chance to finally get a win. He basically said he would try to pull off a Hail Mary to get it done, which of course he did not win his race, unfortunately ending his win streak of winning in one race every single year. That ends his 19-win streak. But Kyle Busch also spoke on the meeting that took place earlier this week. He spoke on the meeting when it comes to manipulation. He basically said there really wasn't a lot that he learned in the meeting from NASCAR, and there wasn't much to be taken away from it, and he does believe that there's a really good chance that manipulation once again come into play in some shape or form in the not-so-distant future once again. Now, obviously, Kyle Busch is referencing what happened at Martinsville Speedway. You had multiple Chevy personnel that were involved. Ross Chastain and Austin Dillon were right behind basically William Byron, and they were not passing William Byron. Now, we talked about this in the previous episode from earlier today, that Austin Dillon basically said that they were not intentionally trying to block for William Byron, which many people kind of felt that was a little bit BS from Austin Dillon, because many people, especially with Austin Dillon's reputation, many people saying, especially with him saying, do you know the deal? A lot of people kind of felt like that was definitely a lot of manipulation from the Chevrolet camp. And I think Kyle Busch is definitely right. There's probably going to be a good chance that this is going to come up once again at some point. But NASCAR does say they're planning to penalize the manufacturers if the manufacturers do to continue to get involved in certain controversies like this. We're probably going to start seeing manufacturers getting penalties for stuff like this, which I do think truly needs to happen. Stuff like this should not be happening with the race manipulation. The fans are fed up with it. They're tired of all this stuff happening every single year. We've been seeing it. We saw it 2 years ago with Stewart-Haas Racing, and NASCAR was very pissed off and frustrated with the outcome of the event. I really hope we don't get race manipulation in the future, but I do think, like I mentioned already, I think there's a really strong chance and a really great possibility that race manipulation is going to come up in some shape or form, which a lot of people are kind of tired of talking about it, but we're going to have to keep talking about it as more stuff comes out about it, and I think that a lot of people have rights to be frustrated with everything that's been going on when it comes to that. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Ryan Truex. Now, Ryan Truex is speaking to Noah Lewis from TSJ Sports, and Ryan Truex speaking about the final start for Martin Truex Jr. And Martin had apparently come over speaking to Ryan Truex, his brother, and Martin said, "You are next." And Ryan Truex, by the end of the quote, basically said he is hoping for his big break and hoping he can catch a really big break going forward. He said that he's kind of looks at Martin and how long it took for him to get his big break around 32 or 33, and Ryan feels like that he hopes to be the guy that can take that next step going forward. Now, Ryan Truex is a driver that currently does not have anything signed yet for 2025. He did make a start with Sam Hunt Racing earlier this year at Homestead Miami Speedway and was running inside the top 15 before getting caught up in an incident and wreck with Josh Williams near the middle to end portion of the event. But Ryan Truex is a driver, in my opinion, that has done an excellent job with Joe Gibbs Racing. And I'd have to think going into next year, he is going to be back at Joe Gibbs Racing in some sort of capacity. And I think he's a driver that if you put him in full-time behind the wheel and he can get the funding and sponsorship, I truly believe that Ryan Truex could be the next big thing in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. He's gotten 2 wins this year, you know. I mean, he, of course, won at Dover, his second career win, and everyone called him, of course, a Dover merchant, and then he went on to win Daytona, a super speedway race that Martin Truex Jr. has kind of struggled at. I think if you put him full-time in a Joe Gibbs Racing car, I truly do believe that he could be a major championship threat and a major contender. The problem for Ryan is the fact he needs sponsorship and funding. And unfortunately for Ryan, he doesn't bring that sponsorship funding that you're going to need to be very, very successful. So that's what he is going to need going into next year if he wants to run more races. If you want my prediction for Ryan Truex going into next year, I think he is going to make select starts with Joe Gibbs Racing, maybe starts with Sam Hunt Racing, because they're probably not going to have one full-time driver in one of their cars next year. But I think he'll run at least part-time next year in 2025. But I think a lot of people like myself would absolutely love to see Ryan Truex get the chance and opportunity to be full-time. But again, the question will come down to, will they be able to find the money for Ryan Truex? That is going to be the big question going into next year, along with other drivers that we're going to talk about here in just a little bit. But like I said, I really hope that they can find the money for Ryan, because I truly do believe that Ryan Truex should be racing in the NASCAR Xfinity Series full-time with how much talent he does have. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Christopher Bell. Now, Christopher Bell had some very strong comments over the weekend before the NASCAR Cup Series race took place at Phoenix Raceway. He says he felt cheated out of making the championship 4 due to all the manipulation going on. He continues on by saying that he knew all the Chevy manipulation going on, which caused him to panic at the end of the race and basically running into the outside wall and doing the wall riding going into turn number 3. He also feels like he should have made the championship 4. Now, I do think that Christopher Bell has every right to be frustrated and upset, and I do agree with Christopher Bell on certain ways. Number one, Chevrolet was definitely playing race manipulation games. Ross Chastain and Austin Dillon definitely were helping out William Byron, basically saying, do you know the deal? That is a major indication that they're definitely playing some race manipulation throughout the event, with Austin Dillon definitely being the most egregious. The problem is for Christopher Bell, and while I do agree he probably should have been in the championship 4 based off the race manipulation, he still wall rode. And NASCAR banned wall riding 2 years ago. It doesn't matter if you wall ride for a second or two. Now, some will bring up what happened with Kyle Larson and what he did at Richmond last year. And yeah, probably should have gotten a penalty for that because he did wall ride. But I do think that for Christopher Bell, while I do 100% understand the frustration, and I do get why he was really, really pissed off and upset that he basically felt like he got cheated, and he probably should have been in the Final Four just based off of stats. Christopher Bell was one of the most consistent drivers all year, was one of the most consistent drivers throughout 2024, was extremely strong in these playoffs, ran up front most of the year except the Marzo, the last race where it really mattered at that point, and he definitely should have been in the championship 4 over Joey Logano, who of course ended up winning the championship. But at the same token, same time, he's still wall ride. If you wall ride, you're going to lose the chance and opportunity to go and compete. And that's what an unfortunate situation is for him because he got put in a really bad position. Bubba was trying to help him so he could end up advancing. But I really hope that with the stuff talking about the manipulation, among other things, that we can finally get this put to rest where we can see NASCAR start stepping in. But again, I also understand Bell's frustration that the manipulation was going on. because there was clear manipulation happening on the racetrack. And I think that NASCAR needed to step in and do something about it. But at the same time, as much as Bell is right that the Chevrolets were doing manipulation, you also had the Toyotas doing manipulation a little bit as well. I know Denny was saying basically in his presser that the tires were bald for Bubba Wallace. If that's true, that's definitely really heartbreaking there. But I think Bell should have been in the Final Four. Larson should have been in the Final Four. And other guys probably shouldn't have been in the Final Four over guys like Joey Logano. But it is what it is at this point. Now the focus is toward 2025. But again, I do get to understand the frustration from Christopher Bell on his side when it comes to these things. I completely get it and understand. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Noah Grayson, Todd Gillan, and Bubba Wallace. Now, basically, all three drivers spoke on the fact that they are not concerned about their futures in the NASCAR Cup Series in 2025. Beginning with Bubba Wallace and Todd Gillan, Bubba Wallace basically said that he doesn't have anything changed for 2025 at this point, and he doesn't expect anything to change in regards to his ride. Remember, Bubba Wallace signed a multi-year contract extension with 23XI Racing through 2026, and Bubba does bring a lot of sponsorship and funding to the table. So we do expect that Bubba will be back next year. He did sign a multi-year extension, and Bubba's, with how good he ran this year, had 14 top 10s, 7 or 8 top 5s, and was a legit contender for wins throughout the whole entire season. He deserves to be back. But it all depends on what's happening with this stuff, because remember, 23XI did lose their preliminary injunction case that we talked about earlier today. Continuing with Todd Gillan, he doesn't also expect anything to change. He did sign a multi-year extension. I don't believe Todd Gillan will be going anywhere, even if they don't have their charters for next year. I think Todd Gillan will stick around. Noah Grayson also said the same thing and kind of didn't confirm what number he's going to be running with Front Row next year. But everyone's saying it's going to be the number 4. There's been a lot of rumors and rumblings that the number 4 is going to be the number that they are going to end up using for Noah Grayson in 2025, which would make a lot of sense, right? The number 4 is an SHR number. Obviously, they did acquire, or technically acquired, a charter from Stewart-Haas Racing, and Grayson's name has continued to be the lead candidate and the favorite to get that seat for the 2025 campaign. I look for Grayson, though, and all these drivers to be strong, and it's a shame that they had to be put into the crosshairs, because Bubba did say he really has not been on social media in recent weeks and wants to focus on being very, very good. And I look for all three drivers to really excel. Todd Gillan was really strong throughout the year. Noah Grayson, especially early in the year, was extremely strong out on the racetrack. And Bubba Wallace, in the middle portion of the year and the end of the year, he showed a lot of promise and showed a lot of potential. And while all three of these drivers do have multi-year contracts, again, it's all going to come down to what happens with the charter agreement. But I don't expect these drivers to fully be affected, but we're going to have to kind of wait and see what happens with all three of these drivers going into next year. But like I mentioned, already said, I think things are going to be fine for all three of these guys, and I do think they'll be fine going into next year. Hopefully things can get figured out, though, so that they're in a good position to race. Hopefully things can get figured out and settled for 23XI next year, but we'll have to wait and see what happens, and if their charters do get officially confiscated, which are about a month and a half away from that being a potential possibility for next year. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Riley Herbst once again. Now, one thing that got overshadowed by the NASCAR Xfinity Series race was Riley Herbst putting up an absolute dominant clinic. He had the fastest car by a mile in this race. He led over 150 or 160 laps, and he kind of criticized a lot of people about picking up that win in victory, which I'll be honest, I've been critical of Riley Herbst in the past on his performance, but I think he proved me wrong over the course of the last couple of years. He's gotten much better as a race car driver, and his performance has absolutely gotten second to none over the course of the last year or so. Having multiple wins this year, he's done a great job. But he also spoke on the fact that his future is currently a little bit uncertain at the moment, and he doesn't fully exactly know what he's doing yet for 2025. And Jordan asked why, because he really is a little worried about what he's doing. Now, it's no secret that Riley Herbst has been the lead candidate and the front runner for the 23XI Racing seat, as they are expected to expand to a 3-car operation in 2025. We also do know they're going to run a 4th part-time entry next year from Mark Truex Jr. for the Daytona 500. Maybe Carlos Kerbush, they were willing to come back. But I'm looking at Riley Herbst, and I think Riley has really proved himself over the course of these last couple years. And he was expected to be announced not too long ago with 2311. They have been buying up people, not buying, but they have been acquiring people to be part of this program in their expansion routes for 2311. The problem is, like I already mentioned, 2311 Racing lost their preliminary injunction case, and there's a really good chance and possibility that they're going to lose all their charters altogether, and they're not going to be able to get that third charter for 2025. That is the big concern for Riley Herbst at this moment right now. Now, Riley Herbst, do I think he deserves to be in the Cup Series? I would say yes. I do think Corey Heim is a better driver than Riley, but unfortunately for Corey Heim, unlike Riley Herbst, Corey does not bring this funding and sponsorship. And just a reminder, earlier this week on Thursday, it was confirmed that Corey Heim will be back with Tricon Garage, so we do believe that he will be in that fourth part-time entry for next year as well. I look at Riley Herbst, right, and he's moving up the couple guys like Shane Van Gisbergen, who's going to be a full-time rookie next year, AJ Allmendinger, who's going back to Cup, and Cole Custer, who's also returning the Cup next year, or most likely moving up, and also the other charter for front row going to Zane Smith. But I do believe that for Riley Herbst, I think he's proven himself. He's gotten a lot better, and I think he's proved a lot of people wrong throughout this year and has shown a lot of improvement, shown a lot of focus, and shown so much more potential throughout this year that has made people like myself a believer in him. And I think he's done a great job this year, and it would be sad to see that he wouldn't get the chance and opportunity to go to 2311. But I am pretty confident that it's going to get figured out, and I think it will get sorted out, hopefully for Riley. It does seem like it's very likely at this point that he'll end up at 2311, but it all will depend on what happens if they can get the charter stuff figured out. We'll see if Riley truly does, in fact, go to 2311, but it seems very likely, especially with the family funding it, that Riley Herbst more than likely than not will be over at 2311 Racing in 2025. We'll have to see if it ends up getting figured out for the next year. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Chandler Smith. Now, during the NASCAR Xfinity Series race, we saw the communications with Justin Allgaier. We already talked about this earlier today, where Justin Allgaier went on to pick up the victory, and not the victory of the race, but ended up picking up the championship. Well, one very interesting comment that came out was about his thoughts on Chandler Smith. He basically kind of let it out of the back that Chandler Smith will not have a ride for 2025, and his future in NASCAR is not only uncertain with Joe Gibbs Racing, but it's also very uncertain in NASCAR as a whole. Now, we've already talked about this on the channel multiple times, but it's heavily rumored at this moment right now that Chandler Smith will not be back at Joe Gibbs Racing in 2025, as they will have a four-time car for next year, or a fourth part-time entry that will be full-time, but it's going to be fitted with a lot of part-time guys. Maybe Bubba Wallace, perhaps. Maybe, of course, potentially see Tanner Gray behind the wheel of one of these seats, Mark Truex Jr., Ryan Truex perhaps, and a couple other guys. And from what I know, Chandler Smith does not have as much funding and sponsorship for 2025. And he mentioned this too, that he needs a pretty big pocketbook for him to have the chance and opportunity to get a great ride. And he said that he unfortunately does not have the funding to get a really great ride at the moment for 2025. I think Chandler Smith is a very good prospect. And I remember many, many years ago, even 4 or 5 years ago, where Chandler Smith was one of the highest top prospects in the sport. And I still think he is one of the best prospects out there. The problem is Toyota does not have a lot of really great seats currently at the moment. Now, there have been rumors circulating that potentially Chandler Smith could have gone to Front Row Motorsports for next year, but that ride will be likely going to the other Smith, that being Zane. And Zane does have a little bit of funding and sponsorship, unlike Chandler Smith. It would be a big shame to see Chandler, who has proven himself and has done a really solid job in recent years in the NASCAR Xfinity Series, picking up 2 wins. And while he did not make the championship for this year, it would be a really big shame to see someone like Chandler Smith, who's done a great job over the last couple of years in Xfinity. It would suck to see someone who's also a great prospect not being in the sport. The problem is you got to have a lot of funding and sponsorship, and you got to have a pretty big pocketbook. And like you already mentioned, he doesn't have that big book that you're going to need for some of these big teams. I could see him going back down to the Truck Series perhaps, maybe go to RSS Racing. There are still some rides over at RSS Racing available currently at the moment, but I think those rides are drying up very, very quickly. So I really hope they can get it figured out for Chandler and he can find a ride for 2025. But again, it seems very, very unlikely at this point that Chandler Smith is going to have a ride for next year, which if it's true, very, very unfortunate for Chandler because I think he's a really good talent and I think he's got a lot of potential. But again, you've got to have funding and sponsorship if you're going to get the seat Unfortunately, like people like SVG are going Cup racing, he doesn't have a ride. That's why Williams Walsh, Brandon Jones, and of course Taylor Gray moving up next year because of course they have a lot more funding and sponsorship than Chandler Smith currently at this moment. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Aric Almirola. Now, after the NASCAR Xfinity Series race concluded, Aric Almirola spoke to Matt Weaver after finishing in third place in the Xfinity Series race. Now, Aric did speak on a really solid year in 2024 and thanked everybody for the support, I believe, in the video. But he also says he is not sure if he will be back in 2025. Was asked if he will come back in the 2025 season and basically said, we will see. Now, we've kind of talked about this a little bit on the channel a couple times, but there's been a lot of rumors and speculation about Aric Almirola's future in NASCAR, whether or not he is going to come back in 2025 or retire altogether from the NASCAR series together, not just in the Cup Series, but the Xfinity Series as well. Now, Aric Almirola in 2024 had a pretty solid year. Aric was able to, of course, pick up 3 victories this year, those at Martinsville, Kansas, and then, of course, at Martinsville about a week or so ago, and was able to have one of the best seasons altogether to the point where he only ran half the season after even getting suspended after getting into an altercation with Bubba Wallace, and was still able to finish inside of the top 20 in the points, showing how good that number 20 car was. And Aric was able to have a really good career renaissance. While he also was not able to win the Owners' Championship this year, I think Aric Almirola put together a very strong year. Now, could Aric Almirola fully retire from the sport? That is certainly a really big possibility here because Aric has been around for a very long time. He's been involved in NASCAR in some sort of capacity, I believe, since 2005 or 2006, and Aric Almirola does have a family. I don't think you'll ever see him go back to running full-time in NASCAR because, like I said, Aric Almirola is around 40 years old, and Aric has said this, and I think his family even told him, saying, no, you are not going full-time anymore. So I don't think we're ever going to see Aric Almirola ever end up running full-time again. But could he come back and run part-time with Joe Gibbs Racing? That would certainly be a possibility. If I'm Joe Gibbs Racing and Joe Gibbs especially, or even tied, I'm calling Aric back up to run next year. The fact he got 3 wins, which is tied for the second most on the same level as Sam Mayer, Shane Van Gisbergen, not Justin Allgaier, but a couple other guys in the field, I think it would be really smart to bring him back to run a few more races next year, maybe 10 to 12 races, because I think he'd be an easy guy to get a few victories. And the fact he was so competitive throughout the year showed that he still had a lot of potential. And I think having a career renaissance in Xfinity would be really, really great to see. But again, it's all going to come down to what they decide to do in regards to, because he does have funding, that's a big thing. He gets a sponsorship, which will basically be a major help to him running full-time if he does want to. But again, I don't think he's ever going to run full-time once again. I look for him to maybe come back part-time next year, maybe run around 10 to 12 races, maybe with him getting a little bit older. Maybe he does decide to go ahead and run less races next year. That could certainly be a major possibility for Aric Almirola going into 2025. But I do think a decision will come before the end of the year if he is going to come back next year. It would be really, really nice to see him make a comeback in 2025, maybe run a few races next year, because I think he's done a really great job with this organization and team. But again, it will all come down to what they decide to do in regards to Joe Gibbs Racing on that all-star car. If he does come back next year, it might be a few truck series starts, maybe goes back to Cup on a part-time basis, and maybe, just maybe, we'll see Aric Almirola come back to Joe Gibbs Racing in the Xfinity Series in 2025. We'll see what happens there. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next major story of today's episode as we're talking about Kroger and RFK Racing. Now, if you're on social media over the course of the last couple of days, you have probably seen all the posts coming out between Kroger and RFK Racing. And Ricky Stenhouse Jr. posted a video on Saturday morning before cars got on track that it was pretty much confirmed and now confirmed that Kroger will not be returning to JTG Daugherty Racing in 2025. Then Bob Pockerston, of course, put out a post where Kroger also thanked Ricky Stenhouse Jr. for everything over the last 4 or 5 years with their commitment with JTG Daugherty Racing. And basically, Bob had indicated that RFK Racing will be running a third car in 2025. Then earlier this evening, with Ryan Preece being the lead candidate for that, if you looked at Brad Keselowski and RFK Racing's Instagram post, you probably saw some very interesting stuff. You probably saw that Brad was walking back with Ryan Preece, holding his arm, I believe, across. And if you look at page number 8 of that Instagram post, you probably saw Ryan Preece there on the Instagram post. Then Brad Keselowski released a thread earlier this evening saying there's some big changes coming for 2024 with a lot of things going on, and also indicated that he is not retiring anytime soon, and he's going to be back in 2025, is not planning to go anywhere anytime soon. So Brad Keselowski is not retiring. But he also confirms that there will be some big announcements around RFK Racing for 2025 in the next 2 weeks, which he did confirm to Bob in the next 2 to 3 weeks. Some big announcements are coming. It is expected that RFK Racing, of course, will expand to a 3-car operation in 2025, and Ryan Preece is going to be the driver. Now, why is Ryan Preece going to be the driver? Well, one, a lot of people at RFK Racing do believe that Ryan Preece has a lot of potential. I think near the end of this year, Ryan Preece showed a lot of potential with Stewart-Haas Racing, a team that, of course, is officially shut down and was running up front a lot more consistently through the end of this year. The other big reason is because of Kroger. Kroger has a previous working relationship with Ryan Preece from working at the days of JTG Doherty Racing, and Kroger really liked Ryan Preece and what he could show. And like I said, I think that Ryan Preece has not been given the fair shake that he has been able to show. I think he is a very, very talented driver and a really good driver out on the racetrack. He's done a really good job in the NASCAR Xfinity Series, in the lower series, won a couple races with Joe Gibbs Racing in number 18 in the 20 car. Go back to that 2017 Iowa race where he beat Kyle Benjamin, and then in 2018 he got that win at Bristol in the number 18 car. Then he came to Cup for a few years with JTG and struggled a little bit. And then he went back down to the Truck Series before they became Tricon, drove for DGR Racing and ran very well, outperformed Haley Deegan in that equipment and outperformed people like Taylor and Tanner Gray in that equipment and got 2 wins at Nashville Super Speedway. And then he came back to Cup with Stewart-Haas and got a pole in the first year that Kevin Harvick failed to win outside of 2021 and SHR failed to win a race. So I think that Ryan Preece will be a really, really good driver, and I think he will be super fast and super, super competitive at the team. But I do also think that Chris Buescher and Brad are going to outperform him. I think that is what likely will end up happening. But I do think Ryan Preece will be a legitimate playoff threat and contender. And I think he's the perfect choice to choose. We saw Chris Buescher kind of struggle at JTG for a few years there and came back to RFK, or before they became RFK, and he went on to have a solid career up to this point. 5 career or 6 career NASCAR Cup Series wins and was a championship threat near the end of last year. And Brad showed championship caliber stuff this year too. So I think that Ryan Preece, well, I don't know if he could be that. You never know, right? He's never been really given the fair shake. And I think him getting a chance and opportunity to work with RFK Racing next year, that being Ryan Preece, I think is absolutely the right move. I think he is a good driver, and I think he's shown potential over the years as a race car driver in this series. And I think what he's done in modifieds and what he's done in other series has been pretty good to see. So I think him being part of RFK is absolutely a no-brainer, and I do think that announcement is coming here very soon. I think it will come out before Thanksgiving, considering the fact I think a lot of silly season moves are going to be coming very soon, maybe from Junior Motorsports and other companies down the road as well. And once that officially does break, we'll discuss it here live on the channel. But I do, like I said, truly believe this, that Ryan Preece is going to be the driver, and I think he's earned the right and opportunity and the chance to get it done. We'll see what ends up happening, and we'll see what truly comes. But Ryan Preece will be at RFK Racing, and that announcement will be coming very soon. And now we're going to jump onto the first of 2 major stories in today's episode as we're talking about FedEx. Now, originally there was a post that came out from Denny Hamlin, and basically a lot of people are saying, is FedEx officially leaving Joe Gibbs Racing? Well, earlier tonight it was reported by Adam Stern and everybody in the industry that it seems like FedEx will not be returning to Joe Gibbs Racing in 2025, and they will end their tenure with Denny Hamlin at the end of this year, and they just ran their final race as an official sponsor with Joe Gibbs Racing and Denny Hamlin. There's obviously been some rumors circulating that this was likely going to happen, but all of us kind of thought they were probably either just going to downsize and downscale their sponsorship working with Denny Hamlin and Joe Gibbs Racing. Now, it's no secret that FedEx has been running into some financial trouble. They've been losing a lot of money over the course of the last couple of years, and the new CEO of FedEx has been looking for ways to cost cut in the group. And unfortunately, one thing they've been cutting costs on has unfortunately been the racing side of things and the sports side of things and entertainment. They've backed away from the sponsorship of the Commander Stadium in recent years, and over the last 2 or 3 years especially, they've been backing away from sponsoring NASCAR, including Denny Hamlin. It is no secret that FedEx, like I said, has been backing away their involvement in the sport. They quit sponsoring Denny Hamlin for pretty much every single race. He only back like in 2020, 2021. That's when they started backing off, because in 2019 and 2020, they would sponsor pretty much every single race except the one-off from time to time where you had Sports Club sponsor pretty much for the Southern 500 near the end of the year, and now they're no longer going to be part of the sport. It is a really sad day for motorsports as a whole and NASCAR. FedEx has been with Joe Gibbs Racing since 2005. They remember them sponsoring Jason Luffler, Bobby Abani in that one-off when he was in that photo finish with Jimmy Johnson, and even Ricky Craven and those guys in the early 2000s. And then they picked up Denny Hamlin, and they've had an incredible time, an incredible tenure in this sport. And they've won a lot of races. They were on the car when Denny Hamlin won all 3 of his Daytona 500s. They were on the car when Denny Hamlin won a lot of major races. I think they were on the car when he won the Coke 600. They've been on this car and been with Joe Gibbs Racing for many, many years. And they've had one of the longest tenures in motorsports as a whole. To lose FedEx is a major loss for NASCAR as a whole. And it continues to be a major loss for all the sponsors we've lost in NASCAR in recent years. I think about companies, of course, like Geico that are no longer going to be part of the sport. I think about M&M's and Mars brand. Snickers, part of that brand as well. Coca-Cola, I think, has been backing away a little bit. Pepsi, not being part of the sport full-time. Mountain Dew, the Pepsi-Cola sponsorships there. I think about Home Depot. I think about Lowe's that left after 2018. I think about Dollar General. Now, of course, Dollar Tree came in those companies, but Dollar General left the sport in recent years. Like I said, Home Depot. We've seen DoorDash leave in recent years. Burger King hasn't been sponsoring in a very, very long time, since like 2016. Subway's backed away their entitlement of sponsorship. There's been so many major brands and many corporations that have left the sport. And it's a little bit concerning when you think about it too, when a major company like this leaves the sport because of what they've been able to do. And I think it's going to be sad to see a company like FedEx that, like I said, has been around for a very, very long time, that they're unfortunately going away. And I don't think anybody wants to see this happen. A major company and a brand, like I said, leaving the sport and to not work with Denny Hamlin. Now, at this point for Denny Hamlin, you've got to look for sponsorship going into 2025, because this is going to be a contract year for Denny Hamlin. I believe Denny Hamlin had only signed a 2-year extension with Joe Gibbs Racing. This could have some effect on Denny Hamlin, but I also do think that Joe Gibbs will be able to plug and play some of the sponsors. Sports Clips is probably going to step up. I think some of the other companies like Mavis Tires, which has been working with Denny Hamlin a lot more closely on the East Coast and West Coast races, they're probably going to sponsor Denny Hamlin. I'd have to think that with the Campbell's group coming in and sponsoring, we're probably going to see some of those Campbell's brands like the Goldfish brand and the Soup brands that work with the Campbell's brands over the years, and of course the Washington Commanders. I'd have to think, of course, they're going to work with them next year as well. That is certainly going to be a possibility, but it is a sad loss that FedEx is going away. They've been around for so many years in the sport, and I think it's a really tragic loss to see a company like this unfortunately go away. We've lost so many of these big companies over the years that have been part of the sport, and to lose a massive company like this is really, really sad. There's no denying that. They've been around in the sport for many, many years. I remember the iconic FedEx black colors that were around in the purple brand that they've had for a long, long time. And to lose FedEx now and for them to go away, along with Stewart-Haas Racing and Amaro Jr., it is really, really sad to see. It feels like my childhood is kind of going away with all these big sponsors leaving, all these drivers retiring. But at time, things come and go. Sometimes big sponsors leave, and I think that you're going to see a lot more of these big sponsors if things don't change with the sport really quickly. Losing FedEx is a big loss, and I do think that things are only going to get worse if things don't improve. Hopefully things can change, and we keep a lot of these sponsors around going forward. But I think that especially with NASCAR chasing a lot of these sponsors, like Monster Energy perhaps, I think that you're going to only see this continue to up, and I think more of this kind of stuff is going to come into play. But nonetheless, it's a really bad loss for the sport overall, and it's sad to see that FedEx is no longer going to be part of the sport and is going away. But unfortunately, I'm not shocked and surprised about it, sadly, that FedEx is going away, but it is disappointing to see them no longer part of the sport, in my opinion. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the final major story of today's episode as we're talking about 23XI Racing. Now, earlier this weekend, and we talked about this on the channel earlier today, it was confirmed that 23XI Racing and Front Row Motorsports have unfortunately lost their preliminary injunction case with NASCAR and, of course, the judge. They can go, of course, go get an appeal done, but that would be very, very unfortunate, and they may end up losing that appeal. That has to be expedited. The judge, quintessentially, will expedite that process to try to get it done really quickly, which could, unfortunately, end up getting it dismissed in court. And Denny Hamlin, of course, is speaking to media, among other things, including what is going on, and was asked a question, I believe, by Matt Weaver or Jordan Bianchi about, will you be at the 2025 Daytona 500 or will you be at the Clash? And Denny Hamlin says 24/11 Racing fielding a car in the Clash and Daytona 500 for 2025 is currently uncertain at this moment. Where I talked about the fact that Noah Grayson, Todd Gillan, and Bubba Wallace all basically are expected to be part of those organizations, respectively, for 2025. But this is a massive and major development. Now, obviously, this could be a play by Denny Hamlin to basically say, oh, this could be that harm we're looking at, because one of the things that the judge mentioned, I believe, in that preliminary injunction case getting denied is that there really wasn't irreparable harm at this point. But if Denny Hamlin is playing that game where there is irreparable harm for the organization, this could be the play to go with. But this is majorly huge because open teams, even though they are going to get a lot more money, if teams like 2311 Racing and Front Row don't show up, those are some really competitive teams. And you think about the amount of cars getting in, but we may see 3 or 4 cars from 2311 Racing show up, and Denny Hamlin does, I don't know, while they do have a lot of that money, they don't have a lot of money to run 4 cars, because like I said, we are expecting 4 2311 Racing cars to potentially show up at the Daytona 500. Bubba Wallace does have a multi-year contract, of course, with 2311 Racing through 2026. Tyler Reddick, there's been rumors speculating recently in the last week or so that Tyler Reddick could jump ship and go to another organization, perhaps if things don't end up working out really well for the team. Maybe RFK could be that possibility, but that's probably not going to be a possibility for this year. I think that we may see this happening going forward too. And the other big thing is, if 2311 in Front Row, unless they file for an appeal or basically file to basically get a playoff waiver, which they're probably not going to get a playoff waiver, they probably could end up missing the playoffs, which Tyler Reddick is a perennial championship threat and contender. He's been a championship contender the last couple of years, made the Final Four this year, and seeing him potentially go from being a championship contender and getting it, almost had a chance to get it done earlier today, but not win the championship, to going and potentially missing the Daytona 500, yeah, that is absolutely going to be wild. It's going to make the Daytona 500 duels very interesting because there's probably only going to be 30 chartered entries out there, and you're probably going to have 10 to 15 cars out there that are competing for the Daytona 500 spots. And so you have potential possibility of Tyler Reddick missing Daytona 500. Bubba Wallace, who is one of the biggest superstars currently at the moment, one of the best super speedway racers out there, potentially missing it. You could have Riley Herbst missing it because Riley Herbst more than likely is going to end up at 2311 Racing next year. You could end up seeing him miss the Daytona 500. And then you think about Mark Truex Jr. Mark Truex Jr. is already going to be an open car as it is for the Daytona 500, but now it's going to be a lot more difficult and a lot harder for him to have a great chance and opportunity to end up making the Daytona 500 even more. And then Front Row with Noah Grayson, most likely Zane Smith, and then you think about Todd Gillan, who are all really good super speed racers with Team Penske stuff. Now, of course, they end up being the fastest cars in qualifying. They won't have to really deal with it. We know Jimmy Johnson, he's going to run the Daytona 500 most likely next year. You've got RCR, who I think could run a third car at some point next year, including the Daytona 500, most likely for Austin Hill. There's a lot of rumors about Spire Motorsports. They're potentially going to run a fourth car at some point. Could they run in the Daytona 500? That could certainly be a possibility. What about Trackhouse? Do they run a fourth car next year? I'd have to think there's some talk about it. They're probably going to run a fourth car at some point next year, maybe for Connor Zillage. That could certainly be a possibility as well. So I think there's a lot of things that are majorly in play. I really don't know what 2311 Racing is going to do, right? We don't have official word exactly what the plan is. They're going to appeal it at this point. That's all we know currently at the moment. And I really would love to see them win the appeal so they can focus on racing in 2025, because I do truly believe they deserve to be on the track. They've had a really big system, and they've been able to have a really proven system and have been able to be super fast and super competitive. But again, it's all, like I said, going to come down to what happens with the charter stuff, right? And if NASCAR basically completely rips their charters away from the teams that are involved in the lawsuit that will unfortunately end up affecting them. And I do think that it hurts a team like 23XI, right, and Front Row Motorsports too. So either they're going to stop the lawsuit going forward if they can't get past the preliminary injunction case, or they're going to continue on with it, but they may not show up on the racetrack, which would be massively shocking if that became the case. And if other drivers want to get involved with that, that's on them at this point. But I do think that there is definitely some big questions that do need to be answered and asked about 23XI Racing's future currently at the moment right now. And Front Rows too a little bit with them not signing the preliminary, well, not preliminary injunction, but with the preliminary injunction not being signed for next year. I do worry a little bit about the future of these organizations. I do think things will get worked out for the Daytona 500, but I do think the Clash, it's very unlikely that they'll show up at the Clash. So we'll have to wait and see what happens, and there's probably more information coming out really soon in regards to some of this stuff, but we'll have to wait and see what happens and see how everything ends up playing out. But I do believe there's some big stuff coming down the horizon, and I think a lot of chaos is about to happen when it comes to some of the charter stuff going on at this moment. So we'll see as more information does end up coming out. So that is going to be for today's NASCAR news and motorsports news episode. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, notifications on, and if I win a video, it does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Let's go below that and comment your thoughts below on today's episode. You think 23XI Front Row will skip the Daytona 500? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And what are your thoughts about the other stuff, including some of the stuff we talked about today? Let me know it in the comments below. There won't be more content dropping today on the channel. Tomorrow on the channel, we are going to have basically a silly season update going through all the silly season news over the course of the last couple days. Then on Wednesday, we'll have most likely a NASCAR news video dropping. Thursday, I'll be ranking every single race from 2024 going through that. And then on Friday, we should have a NASCAR news video more than likely. And over the weekend, I'm going to have a couple special videos dropping, along maybe some silly season predictions for the other series especially. Expect that to come out on the channel over the course of the next couple of days, talk about Haley Deegan, Shane Van Gisborne, Carl Herbst, Kurt Busch, you name it, Kyle Busch, everybody as well throughout the rest of these weeks. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode, and I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.